Do you know anybody who's ever sat through the second description of the Mishkan and the Kohen's clothing and wanted to pull their hair out while screaming again, why repeat the most boring stuff again? I don't happen to know anybody like that. But if you do, the following might just help answer their question. And there's even a chance that it won't cause them to tear their hair out. Let's begin with a refresher from Parshat Terumah. The menorah, showbread, and ark are all representations of God's revelations, and those revelations are surrounded by pillars and curtains representing the kingdom of priests and the holy people. The Mishkan is a literal representation of God dwelling within the people. If you want to learn more, I've got a video about it. Okay, so we know why we described it once, but why do it again? Well, the first design represented God's desire to dwell among the people. It was a culmination of the pre-calf relationship. But then the people sinned by worshiping their own collective being in the form of the calf. In the passages that follow, Moshe establishes a new relationship with God, but it comes with a price. For the first time, there are national rewards and punishments. We are like a stiff-necked donkey at the end of Parshat Kitisa. If we are not redeemed, then we suffer tremendously. But Moshe does not want the people to suffer. So at the beginning of this reading, Moshe reminds the people of Shabbat. Our basic job is to emulate the cycle of creation and investment in the timeless. It is how we build a relationship with God and how we lead mankind to that same relationship. But then he adds an odd second command. We are not to burn a fire in our Shabbats on the Shabbat day. Why pick that prohibition? Thinking of fire as an expression of God's spiritual energy, as in the burning bush, we can see two things here. First, if we burn fire on our own Shabbat, we'd be elevating ourselves too much, and thus emulating the same mistakes that led to the sin of the calf. But second, and more importantly, without the Mishkan, there is no place for God's full spiritual expression on the very day in which we are to rest with Him. Moshe's command emphasizes the spiritual void that exists within the community. It emphasizes the break in the relationship with God. Interestingly, Moshe doesn't follow up by actually commanding the people to build the Mishkan. He just reminds them that God commanded it and tells them that the wise will perform the commandments. He leaves it up to them to rekindle the flame of their relationship. He leaves it up to them to express their wisdom by filling the void. What follows is remarkable. The people leave Moshe's presence and then build the Mishkan themselves. God's explicit presence is absent for the entire process, and Moshe steps in only once, as we'll see. In this telling, patrons are motivated by their noble hearts and act of their own free will. Wise and motivated women prepare curtains and coverings. Princes give jewels that represent the people's relationship to God, and noble patrons even bring other patrons, and it is a sign of their nobility. Eventually, people give more and do more than is needed, and Moshe steps in for the only time, but only in order to slow them down. Bezalel, who is already granted wisdom by God, then works with the people to build everything to God's plan, emphasizing the people's respect for God's design over their own. This Mishkan is the same physical building God described, but it has been created from a human perspective. The cold and collective anonymity of the first description has been replaced by one in which the people mark their dedication through individual donation and action. Through this, the people have inverted the symbolism of the building. In the first telling, the articles of revelation came first. God wants to dwell within the people, but now the curtains and the pillars which represent the people come first. The people want God to dwell among them. In the first telling, the incense altar is only designed well after the copper one. Smell speaks to our emotions in a remarkably primitive and effective way. In the first telling, the emotional connection to God was to have a place, but only well after we had invested our own creation in the divine relationship. Here, the incense altar comes before the copper one. We invest our emotions first, and the rest follows. In the first telling, the wash basins were described contiguously to the anonymous donations of the half shekel. The priests were to cleanse themselves of any individual influences. But now they're made from the women's mirrors. The women are described as a multitude, recalling the masses of the people who worship the calf. The tools of vanity that led to self-worship are sacrificed to prepare the Kohanim for their proximity to God. The Kohanim wash in the women's atonement for the sin of the calf. The building of the Mishkan represents the only time that the concepts of holiness and creative effort, kadosh and melacha, are brought together. Even God rests from his creative effort to allow for holiness. But this work, and this work alone, directly builds the timeless relationship to God. This building is a human one. It is an expression of emotion and of a desire to rebuild the relationship with God on God's terms. This Mishkan reflects the relationship that exists after the sin of the calf. For the people, it is a far more visceral relationship. We are God's partners now, not just his servants. Only the Kohen Gadol, with the God representing gold in the ephod cut down to a single dimension, finds his relationship simplified. The errors that were made with the calf lead him to have a far more constrained role. When the flat-pack Mishkan is brought to Moshe, he sees it and he blesses the people. It is then that God finally returns the scene and commands Moshe to actually construct the building. And then at the end of the book of Exodus, the fire of the Lord comes and dwells within the people. The repair is complete. When describing the curtains that represent the holy nation, the text says, all the wise-hearted people made the curtains. A cherubim design, the work of a master weaver, he made them. Cherubim are those who are close to God, and the curtains represent the holy nation. In this verse it is clear who the plural wise-hearted people are, but the singular he is ambivalent. I like to think that all the wise-hearted people dedicate their effort to making a holy nation one that is close to God, but ultimately it is God alone who makes it real.